Oversight Committee, and we engaged in a fair number of fairly high-profile hearings involving the Clinton administration, specifically the travel office firings, which engaged us for about 6 months or so, and followed by the sort of mysterious invasion of FBI files by the Clinton folks. So I was on television a fair amount of the time. I was on Meet the Press and Larry King Live and all of that sort of thing, and I would be recognized as I go through the Pittsburgh airport by people who would say either, get off their back or right on, keep going, whatever the persuasion might be. About 6 months or so ago, I was again passing through the Pittsburgh airport, having been out of office now for 2.5 years or so, 3 years. And on those moving walkways, and I'm going one way and somebody's coming the other way in the moving walkway. And as we're approaching, this person is going sort of like this. Oh. And as he gets by me, he said, "You used to be somebody." So, yeah, I used to be somebody once upon a time. I do miss Congress from time to time, but when I get nostalgic for my old pursuits, I miss the colleagues as much as anything. But when I do get nostalgic, I turn on C-SPAN, and that reminds me, frankly, why I decided to not run again back in 1996. And I think what I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about, Sandra Day O'Connor is a tough act to follow, but I thought from sort of a congressional perspective of my perspective on one of the principal branches of government, the Congress of the United States, which took a hit or two from the Associate Justice this morning, and deservedly so. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got to this position. One of the reasons that I left was because, frankly, the place is becoming so terribly polarized that it's very difficult to reach accommodation, to reach consensus, much less even come to any kind of negotiated compromise on legislation. And over the 18 years that I served, I saw that process sort of deteriorate over the period of time that I was there. When I came in 1978, it was a pretty collegial body. You could work across the aisle, you could cooperate. I used to work pretty closely with a very liberal Democratic member from Broomall, Pennsylvania, named Bob Edgar, and we sponsored legislation together. That's really not possible anymore. It's very difficult to have any kind of collegiality across the center aisle of the Congress. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the ramifications that may mean down the road. How did this begin to happen? And I will tell you my theory, and I think it will hold up. We have gotten very adept at the way we reapportion the congressional seats in this country, 435 congressional seats. And by the way, I'll interrupt to say that I'm chairman of the task force on traffic in Chautauqua. We are trying to get rid of noise and too much traffic driving around here. And I see we've got a lot of work to do. Cindy Peterson is a member of my task force as well. But we, as you all know, reapportion the country every 10 years. We take the census and we decide, okay, where should the seats go? The Justice spoke that it's now one man, one vote. That was Baker versus Carr. Critical decision to the Supreme Court where they determined that no member of Congress's vote should have any greater weight than any other member's vote. So the key is to get congressional districts that are right on the numbers. For the last 10 years, the magic number has been about 585,000 people. Every member of Congress was to represent 585,000, give or take. Not very many, because the court has held it pretty tight on that portion. So when we reapportioned in 1980, in 1990, we began to use techniques that had not been available before that time. Computer modeling, all kinds of very sophisticated. Pretty safe for Republicans to win, or pretty safe for Democrats to win. We begin to sort of make them safer and safer for one party or the other, and that really depends on who controls the state legislature as to how it's going to come out. And we able to do that and resist any kind of constitutional challenge. Now, the result of that is this. If you create a pretty safe Republican district, you are likely to elect a pretty conservative Republican. You're likely to elect somebody who perhaps is to even the right of the mainstream of the Republican Party. By the same token, if you create a pretty safe Democratic seat, you tend to elect a much more liberal member than you might otherwise do it. Because what you've done is preclude, in many cases, the possibility of a primary election. Now, primaries are where you really begin to sort of get different points of view within each party. Grade A, Democratic philosophy in the Democratic Party, the same thing in the Republican Party. If you take away the primary as a sort of a winnowing process, you are going to get the extremes on either end of the political spectrum when they come to Washington. I really first became aware of this in 1980, which after the reapportionment then in the state of California, the fellow who did the reapportionment in that year was a guy named Phil Burton, who was a member of Congress. And California's a big state. They have now something over 50 representatives. The Democrats controlled the state House and the state legislature at that time. So he created a reapportionment plan that basically made about 60% of the seats pretty safe Democratic, about 35% pretty safe Republican, and about 5% that were really contested. And when that delegation came to Washington in 1981, they couldn't sit in the same room together because they were so extreme on either end. I mean, you had very liberal people. Maxine Waters is one of the most liberal members of the Congress. B1 Bob Dornan, I don't know if you've ever seen Bob Dornan, but he is certainly one of the more conservative, was one of the most conservative. They could not hold a delegation meeting because they were so utterly opposed to one another in terms of political philosophy. So it began then. 1990, I think it was exacerbated. The sort of the thing that I think is really a threat, if you will, to our republic. And Franklin was supposed to have said when asked, what have you created, Mr. Franklin, what have you created, a republic, madam, if you can keep it? I think the thing that makes it somewhat under threat is that we now have maybe 35 seats out of 435 that are truly contested seats. We've created, over the years, we've made more and more of these seats pretty safe. The member gets elected, he's going to stay there as long as he wants to stay there. And only in the very narrowing number of these seats do you really have true contest at any given election. So I think that, as much as anything, has resulted in this continuing polarization within the Congress itself, because these are pretty safe seats. They tend to be pretty conservative Republicans and pretty liberal Democrats, and there's not a whole lot of room to negotiate. What has that meant in terms of the legislative process? It has brought down on the head of the Congress, I think justly, the deserved calumny of people saying what are these people up to, why they don't get anything done, why don't they do anything. Congress is the most criticized body. I think members of Congress rank right down there with aluminum siding salesmen in terms of people's respect and honor. We are not well respected, and I think a lot of the reason for that is that we've had sort of a paralysis that has developed in the body. You look at Congress this year, very little has been accomplished, frankly. Been a lot of political points attempted to be played. And this whole argument over the tax bill, for example, is really an exercise in politics. It's not an exercise in legislating. If we were really interested in legislating the tax bill, you would begin to see some compromises take place. That may still happen. But pretty clearly, both sides were attempting to carve out a political position by which they could then run next year for the general election, when the whole Congress would be up for grabs. And of course, as you all are aware, there are only a 5-vote margin at the moment, and that's another reason why we've had paralysis. But I think the paralysis is getting worse. It's very difficult to negotiate in settlements, to come up with compromises on legislation. Let's face it, legislation is the art of compromise. If you're not able to compromise, if you can't compromise, then you're going to get a paralysis effect, and that's what's happened. We have people, parties staking out positions, either on the left wing of the political spectrum or the right wing, and then just throwing bombs at each other without any real effort being made to negotiate in the center. The center is going to collapse in the Congress. very few of that sort of members left, about maybe 30, 35. Usually in the contested seats, because that's where the process that sort of begins to sort of take off the rough edges of your philosophy of naval life. So that's the tax bill, as I say, is perhaps an extreme example. Republicans have passed the bill, $792 million tax cut. They know that's not going to pass. They know the president's going to veto it. They know that it's never going to become law. Those making political statements. Democrats who come up with 150 or 200 million, they know that's not going to pass. And the question is, before the end of this Congress, will they ever get together? I got to tell you, I'm somewhat doubtful. Same thing would apply to campaign finance reform and some of the others. What are the ramifications of this down the road? Two, I think. One has to do with the courts. Whenever we've had this kind of paralysis in our political, in our politics in this country, and there have been several. I mean, it's not the first time we've had this kind of polarization of the body. Perhaps the most vivid time was before the Civil War. That was not so much on a party line basis as it was on a regional basis. And when you had that kind of leading up to the Civil War, I mean, they really were unable to compromise on much of anything. What happened is the court had to move in and make some of the tough decisions. The Dred Scott decision only really came about because of the fact that Congress was incapable of dealing with the issue of slavery. Couldn't come up with any way to finesse, to compromise on that whole issue. So the court had to move in that case. And in many cases during that period, the court was really the activist by necessity, had to become an activist court. That will happen again, and in fact, you could say that it's happening now in some respects, that the court is more and more being called upon to make decisions that the Congress is either incapable or unwilling to make. If Congress continues to play politics with all these issues, then decisions don't get made. And gradually the pressure builds, a decision has to be made. Ultimately, somebody brings the issue to the court, and the court is going to have to decide it. So I think you will see, unless things change in the regular, you're going to see more and more of an activist court just by necessity. The other thing, of course, is that we're going to see the media, which has been, Congress has been in favor of whipping boy, is going to continue, I think, to attack the Congress, and that is going to continue to sort of lower people's respect for the Congress. And that's very worrisome. If we ultimately lose confidence in our basic system of government, that is the component parts of that system of government, I think it really does not bode well, because there will always be activists, hardcore activists, who will move into a situation like that, try to take advantage of the fact that fewer and fewer people are voting, and you could have a sort of a minority upsurge that takes over the very instruments of government. So I think we're really concerned. How's it going to be resolved? I think that until we get a sense back that we need to maintain some diversity within the body, and we begin to recognize that it's really unhealthy when we create nothing but very safe seats, which means, in essence, you're not really having a democratic process. You're really not electing people with a clash of ideas. You're just sort of anointing somebody to come down and reflect a certain point of view. So until we kind of get away from that and begin to recognize that there needs to be more diversity within the body, I'm just very fearful that we're going to see a continuation of this process. That is my pitch to you today. I think if you're listening, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
The Starr report apparently is going to finalize its report within the next year, and there's suspicion that that's going to be filed about the same time Hillary Clinton will be running full speed for the Senate. Have any reaction to that?
Well, I think, everybody says that Ken Starr has sort of a political tin ear, and that he really, too often in the process, he was really reacting in a non-political way. And he really was very naive in terms of the political process. He never had much to do with it at all. The filing of this, so I would say this, I don't think if he does file the report during the forthcoming campaign, I don't think it will be, in his view, because of political reason. I think it's just the fact that the timing will be such that he will be prepared to file the report at that point, and he will file it. I would tell you that, frankly, there was a lot of hope in my former colleagues that he would not file marches to the tune of a different drummer, and I'm sure he doesn't do this thing politically. It'll have enormous political repercussions. The fact is that all of the items that we dealt with, the travel office, the file matter, and so forth, that was all turned over to him. I think that there was no question that in the file matters that Mrs. Clinton was directly involved in that decision to get those people out of there. Having said that, they could have fired those people the day they got there, and because anybody who works in the White House serves at the pleasure of the president. If the president wants them, they can all be fired. Where they made the mistake was they didn't want to look bad, and they wanted to sort of make it that they were firing them for cause. They'd done illicit, illegal, awful thing, which they really had never done, but they wanted to sort of scapegoat them and get them out and get their people in. Mrs. Clinton directed that process. She really is the one who said, "I want them out, our people in." They really distrusted anybody who had anything to do with the Bushes. They just wanted anybody that was in the White House during the Bush administration out, and that's really what led to that. The irony is that the principal scapegoat was a guy named Billy Ray Dale, who was head of the White House Travel Office, and he was indicted by the Clinton Justice Department on the grounds that he had embezzled funds. It was a really trumped-up charge, totally. He went through named $90,000 of legal fees, and he was acquitted within 1 hour. They brought him to trial and he was acquitted within 1 hour. So the irony is that Billy Ray Dale had voted for Bill Clinton. He was a registered Democrat. The final of that story is that guess who ran Bob Dole's travel arrangements during the campaign? I said Billy Ray Dale. Making our life easier. But the star people had all of that, and I don't think that they felt there was. I felt there had been some perjury involved in this. They apparently did not, and so there's not going to be any indictments coming out of anything that we did. Yes.
Forgive my cynicism, but you looked up the fourth branch of government, and that is, I think, the agency. For those of us in human resources administration, we have to deal with the peculiarities of regulatory functions of the EEOC, OSHA, Department of Ag, Department of Labor. Those issues in terms of promulgating regulations seem to fall between the court's adjudication and the unilateral action of the agency. Where's the role of Congress, or is there none, in trying to police the very agencies that they establish?
Well, as you probably know, we have been the Shada decision, which is the decision that basically precludes Congress. Congress can enact law. They, however, cannot then direct how the agencies of government do that. I mean, in other words, when we have tried to basically say that we don't like a regulation and we want that out of there, we told the Shada decision, they were told that's the prerogative of the executive branch. Now, you're talking about the independent agencies is slightly different kettle of fish, and they're even more out from under the purview of even the executive branch. I mean, they've basically become kind of a law in themselves. Congress really has very little ability, absent changing the law. I mean, we can change the fundamental underlying law dealing with their jurisdiction and their power, but in terms of how they're implementing the law that's been passed, what sort of regulations they're operating in, Congress has very little ability to affect that one way or the other. Except the one way we can and do is through the oversight hearing process, where we can drag up an administrator of an agency and really put them through the hoops if they're off left field or doing stuff that is totally, we think, beyond the pale of what the statute requires. But absent doing that, I mean, I've just, there's a case going on right now where I testified on it in the, I think it's the D.C. circuit. Anyway, it has to do with Indian claims and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And these people, these Indian tribes are supposed to be receiving royalties from oil and gas and timber sales and all that sort of thing. And the government's just absolutely screwed it up from the word go. And yet they've been able to get away with it for 100 years. Even though Congress has been constantly holding their feet to the fire, bringing them up there and demanding it and accounting and so forth, and they go away and say, oh, hey, we're going to work on it, and then they ignore it, and then you bring it back 6 months later and they're still in it. So it's frustrating because you really Yeah, I mean, I think that, of course, varies from member to member. I mean, some members are very partisan, and I think that's probably more and more the case now because it's become a much more polarized position where you really don't hire people from the other party because you expect you're going to be spied on if you do. Others have taken the view that, you know, we're a professional operation, we're not interested in political philosophy, we're here to be legislative and do that. So I really think it kind of depends on the member. My good, yeah. Oh, I see. Well, I see what you're getting to, yeah. And that may well, you know, I mean, that's an area which I think the Clinton Justice Department has been very, very remiss in. I mean, they have not really pursued this whole question of the Chinese connection. There's still a lot of work being done in my former committee, Government Reform Committee, looking into this. But when you have some of the major players, whether it's Johnny Wong or Charlie Tree or so forth, either they've turned state's evidence, which means that they've been they're sort of insulated now, or they're still out of the country. I mean, Chautauqua is still out of the country. There are a lot of them that would be able to be very helpful in this discussion, just are never going to come back here. And it's going to be very difficult to get.
Mariana, thank you, Bill,
Thank
very
you.
much. I appreciate it. Thank you.